Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. This is Linda Abraham. I've been a medical school admissions consultant for well over 20 years, and I'm also going to be presenting today's webinar, the 5-part framework for a successful medical school application. A few items worth noting before we start that I really think can help you get the most from the next hour or so. One, we're going to have a contest towards the end of the webinar, and it's going to be based solely on content presented during the webinar. So stay tuned and you can win. If you've not yet downloaded your webinar worksheet, take a second to do so. You'll find it in the handout section of your control panel. My personal recommendation is that you print it out, you download it, you print it out, and you use it to take notes and follow along, but it's up to you. We are going to, again, I mentioned this is going to be an interactive webinar, so I'm going to ask you questions at a certain point, and I might ask you to raise your hand. That means clicking on the hand icon, 2 icons underneath the horizontal orange arrow. So right now, let's test your hand raising ability. Please raise your hand if you are attending this webinar because you want to become a physician, your dream career. So please raise your hand if that's true for you, if you're here because you want to become a physician. Are you finding that hand icon on your control panel? Because most of you are not here for the right reasons at the moment. Again, raise your hand, click on that hand icon. All right, now you're here for the right reasons. Okay, good. We're going to use the question window for your questions, and I have scheduled time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar. We're also going to use it as an answer window. If I ask an open-ended question, I ask that you respond in the question window, and I see that some of you are asking questions. Yes, the session will be available via recording in a few days. Okay. Okay. I am told that some people attending webinars are really interested in the special that we sometimes provide at the end of the webinar, and this is one of those webinars where we do have a special for webinar registrants. I've even been told that attendees are sometimes very anxious, and that anxiety can take away from their focus. I don't want that to happen to you, so here's the special. $250 off any primary application package with coupon code MEDSAVE250. This ends in 1 week, February 13th, 7 days from today. So you have opportunity. If you go to that URL when the webinar is over, you can view your options. If you want, get in touch with us, talk to us before you buy. But you have, again, until next Wednesday to save $250 on this comprehensive flat rate package. Okay, before diving into the heart of the webinar, I'd like to learn a little bit about you. So first off, where are you located? And city and state, and this would be the question window, please. City and state if you're in the United States, city and country if you're outside. Okay, I see somebody's from Atlanta, Georgia, Seattle, Washington, Northern California, fellow Californian. Okay, anybody else want to share where they're located? San Bernardino, California, even closer, Harrison, Virginia, Boston, Massachusetts, New Bern, North Carolina, Gaithersburg, Maryland. I was actually in Silver Spring a couple of weeks ago. Originally from Los Angeles, but now from living in Lubbock. I won't hold that against you, Drew. New York City. Oh, we got a really nice representation here. Okay, that's great. Now, next question is actually a poll, and that is, where are you at in the application process? This should be now on your screen. Are you planning to apply in 2019-20, in the upcoming summer? Preparing for 2021 or later, or not sure when you're going to apply? And the options are planning to apply in 2019-2020, preparing for 2021 or later, or not sure. And with 92% having voted, that's fantastic. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So 75% of you are planning to apply in 2019-20, and the other 25% are preparing for 2021 or later. Okay, that's pretty much what I expected. And one thing I'm very pleased about is that you all seem very directed and that nobody was in the not sure category. Okay, next poll. Next poll, let's hide this and share. When you apply, are you going to be a first-time applicant or a reapplicant? Okay, again, 100%. Whoa, I'm closing this. We got a great audience here today. So 69% of you are first-time applicants whenever you apply next, and 31% of you are reapplicants. All right, as I'm sure most of you know, about half of the people who are accepted to medical school, approximately in rough terms, are actually reapplicants. So it's a very common experience to apply more than once to medical school. But okay, great. Thank you very much for that information. I appreciate it. Now, I got a call earlier this week, not earlier this week, I got a call a while ago, and it's very similar to a call from many I've had over the last 20 plus years from a young medical school applicant named Joe. Joe wanted to go to medical school. He preferred an allopathic medical school in the US and preferably in his own home state, which makes sense. He wanted my opinion as to his chances and how we could help him. And he said, please be honest. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. I assured him I would be honest because it doesn't make sense otherwise. I asked him about his GPA, his major, his MCAT score, clinical exposure, and community service. He had a 3.2 GPA, 2.9 in the sciences, from a decent state school, a 495 MCAT, and his clinical exposure was a summer of volunteering in a local ER, plus shadowing the family physician for a week. He was a bio major, and his community service consisted of a couple of volunteer gigs at Habitat for Humanity. And as I said, he wanted a U.S. allopathic school. I explained to him what I think he needed to do to become competitive, and you'll see through the remainder of the webinar that he has lots to do. But even though his qualifications now are probably not what he needs to get into a U.S. MD program, there's still lots Joe can do to change them and transform himself into a competitive applicant so that he too can pursue his dreams. Like hundreds, if not thousands of applicants before him, and sometimes their parents, I don't know if there are any parents here, I didn't ask, he was basically asking me how to get accepted to medical school. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to tell you right off the bat, though, that waving a magic wand won't do it. A dab of makeup won't do it. Spin won't work either. Med school admissions isn't ping pong or tennis. What you need to submit is a substantive application. And substance, in my book, means competitive qualifications and an effective presentation of those qualifications. Your overriding aim is to show that you belong at the med schools you are applying to, at least some of them, and if you do that successfully, they will want you and they will accept you. My goal for this webinar is to show you that a successful medical school application has to have each of the 5 elements we're going to discuss, not 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4. And that's my big goal for our hour or so together. So let's dive into the framework. The first part of the framework is demonstrate you can do the work in medical school. Now, in the question window, please, how do you intend to show that you can do that work? GPA and MCAT scores. Good, Drew. That's definitely very effective. My competitive science GPA and MCAT. Okay, important. Holistic. It is holistic. That's why there are 5 parts of the framework. But how are you going to show that you can handle the academic demands of medical school? Letter of rec, that can play a role. Good, Nicholas? Okay, I think I think we have enough to go on, so I'm going to keep going. There's no question that the most common way to show that you can handle the work in medical school is through your undergraduate transcript and MCAT score. Somebody just said research and challenging courses. That's certainly part of it. That would probably be part of the transcript, mostly. You could have research as an extracurricular activity, also volunteer or job, but again, primarily it's going to be your undergraduate transcript and MCAT score because that's something that all medical school applicants have and all can be compared with those elements. Yes, if let's say you started off weak in college and you improve your grades and you also have challenging research as one person just wrote, that'll definitely help. But those elements are absolutely critical. And these are also presented in the primary application. Ideally, you want to be at or above the averages for accepted students in both grades and test scores. But, of course, averages are what they are because people are accepted when at least one is below average. If you are not at or above those averages, how can you convince schools to accept you with below average grades, for example? Well, again, averages are what they are because some people were accepted with below average grades or MCAT scores. But The farther away you are, exactly, a high MCAT, that definitely mitigates. The farther away you are below the average, and if both your grades and your MCAT scores are below average, it's less likely that you can effectively demonstrate you can do the work. What if you have below average grades, for example? Well, again, a high MCAT can mitigate somewhat. If you have a low MCAT, high grades can mitigate somewhat. But one of the probably best ways to deal with that situation and show you can do the work is to consider a post-bac program. Now, we have some fantastic resources if that's something that you conclude you need to consider. We have the A to Z of applying to post-bac programs, which is a free download. Post-bac Admissions 101, which is a collection of articles, resources, and different things that can help you get accepted to post-bac programs. And then the unbelievable story of an orthopedic surgeon is about this fellow right here. And he, Dr. Antonio Webb, he came from a very disadvantaged background. He did have to go to a post-bac program, and he worked really, really hard, got into a great medical school, and at the time that I interviewed him for the podcast, was in an orthopedic residency program, and orthopedics is one of the most difficult residencies to get into. So there's a little bit of inspiration and perspiration in those three resources. Okay, you can retake the MCAT. Somebody asked about that. But it also, that's a little bit of a mixed bag and a little bit of an unpredictable bag, because some schools take your most recent MCAT, some schools take the highest, some schools average. If your science grades are below average, then I would definitely encourage you to consider a post-bac program that will allow you to bring them up, perhaps one that also provides study skills enhancement. Deb, I see you asked a very good question. I'm going to get to it during the Q&A. Okay? All right, now, a high test score as can mitigate. U.S. allopathic medical schools, the average for accepted students is right around 510, 509, 510. Less than the 510 doesn't guarantee rejection, and more than a 510 doesn't guarantee acceptance. But it does give you a basic guideline. And again, your academic ability, your ability to handle the academic demands of medical school is generally evident in your transcript and your test scores, the objective elements of the application. Now, if you think back on our friend Joe, he couldn't make the case that he could do the work. His 495 MCAT was significantly below the 510. His GPA and science GPA were also below average for most medical schools, where it's 3.6 and above. Again, it's an average. It's not a concrete barrier, but he would have a lot of trouble making that case. Now, let's move on to the second part of my framework, okay? And that is having a realistic understanding of medicine, a realistic idea of what you're getting into, and perhaps having some direction within medicine. Now, in the question window, please, how do you intend to show that you have that realistic idea of medicine, a realistic perspective? Experience in the medical field. Very good, Nicholas. Personal statement interview. Well, that's where you'd present it. Shadowing clinical experience. Good. Clinical experience through life experience exposure. That would depend on what your life experience obviously is. Clinical experience. Okay, most of you, I work as an EMT. Excellent. Excellent. That's great. Any scribes here? You can raise your, me. Okay, that's excellent. That's very much scribe and EMT. Wonderful. That's really good clinical experience. Somebody also asked about life experience exposure. We can, again, switch back to that. So you folks are definitely getting the idea there. Joe struggled. Again, getting back to good old Joe. Remember, he had volunteered for one summer in an ER, and he shadowed a doctor for a week. So he did have some, but it didn't show a lot of commitment. It was on the weak side. And medical schools want to admit people who are committed to medicine. And if that commitment is very skimpy or based on the latest television hospital show, It's just not real. It must be based on experience in clinical settings. They have to know that you're not going to be so squeamish you can't function at the sight of blood, that you're realistic about the hours, that you understand that not all patients are nice and not all outcomes are good. So can you handle the workload when you're miserable because you didn't check out what you were getting into? Do you have direction both in terms of your educational needs and post-medical school plans? Now, you're not really expected to know what specialty you want to go into, but many secondaries will ask why you want to attend a specific school. Have you thought about the kind of education you want to have? Are you more interested in primary care or specialties? And which direction do most of your schools, your target schools, graduates go? Do your areas of interest match the school's focus and strengths? For example, urban versus rural, primary care versus specialties, research versus a clinical focus, a specific specialty that you're interested in. They place a lot of graduates in. So your choice of school also can reflect somewhat this realistic view of medicine and the schools that you're applying to. Now I'm going to answer a real quick question here. What about lab work for immunoindustry? It would really depend on the exact work that you did. Obviously, it will show that you are familiar with immunology and immunological concepts if you're doing lab work. But what I'm talking about is clinical exposure, where you're interacting with sick people or their families. That, I think, is really, really important. For some medical schools, they'll want to see research. All of them want to see clinical exposure. And many really, research is a nice to have, but not that important. All right, let's move on to step 3 of the framework. Show that you share the school's values and its mission. Now, let me ask you, raise your hand if any of you are surprised that I included that. Raise your hand if you are surprised that I included fit with the school's value and mission. Oh, we really do have a good group here. So no, about a third of you are surprised. Okay, so for the primary application, frankly, that's not at all important. It can't be important because it's a common app among however many schools you decide to send it to. But when you're talking about secondary applications and you're talking about interviews, then the focus really is on fit. Why do you want to attend this specific program that you are sending a form and a check to, and sometimes essays? Why would they want you in their program? The focus, again, is on fit. Now, how are you going to figure that out? Where are you going to find out about the school's mission and values? Look at the statements. Many schools have mission statements. In the secondary, if asked and interviews, be able to talk about your experiences and draw from them the qualities that your target program's values. Some schools have value statements in terms of what they're looking for. If service to the urban underserved is a priority for the school, talk about your experience at an urban soup kitchen and how effective you were as a member of the food service team. If your target has programs in rural medicine and you want to live in a rural area, talk about your upbringing in rural, Idaho or North Carolina or Alaska or Maine or wherever, and your desire to settle there. If it's, again, this is only if it's true. Note that, and note the difference between mouthing when you're trying to establish this fit. There's a big difference between mouthing platitudes and spitting back the website. The first, mouthing the platitudes and spitting back the website, is not showing that you share the values. The former, the spitback or the spam, it's just a sleight of hand, and it isn't convincing, it isn't real. But examples in your essays, your bullet points, the bullet points in your CV, the items in your activity history or your activity descriptions, your letter of recommendations, and your responses to interview questions must in total demonstrate these qualities that they're looking for, especially, again, in the secondaries. Now, one quality that is increasingly valued by medical school, and by increasingly I mean over the last, let's say, 10 years, 20 years, is teamwork and the ability to work collaboratively. In the question window, can you please provide some examples of teamwork that you've been involved with, and I'll comment on them. Sports, excellent, Nicholas. Having a job, a little more specificity there. I mean, are you working on teams in your job? Are you a team lead? Organization, club membership, good. Working on a research team, good. Tutor, well, as a tutor, you're usually one-on-one, aren't you? Did a team project, good. Being a manager at my job, that would depend on the kind of job you have, and is it a fairly flat structure or very hierarchical? Working on a club executive board, good. I teach groups, good. Being part of a mentoring program, okay. Okay, so I think you have some very good examples here. All right, good. You don't have to spit back phrases at all, but if you bring out these examples and you use them to respond to specific questions and to demonstrate the values that the schools want, including excellent listening skills, collaboration, etc., then you're going to be helping yourself to get into medical school. If you have professional direction or think you know which area of medicine you want to go into, check out residency placement data to select the schools that are strong in your area of interest. You can still change your mind, but if your focus turns out to be your most desired residency, you may be ahead of the game when you get to residency. And again, it's one more way to show fit. Now, if you focus on rankings and stats and forum rumors, that focus can actually obscure this aspect of fit. Med schools have among the lowest acceptance rates of any professional program. They have lots of applicants, and they can be choosy. When I spoke to Joe, my good friend Joe, he didn't have any direction. He didn't know any of the school's stated values or values, period. You need to know them in order to both choose the most appropriate schools and convince those schools to accept you. So that was the third part of the framework. Again, show that you that you can do the work, present a realistic view of medicine, and then show fit by understanding the values and showing that you share the values of the individual schools. All right, the fourth part of the framework. Demonstrate that you're able to contribute to class discussions and teamwork, the school's community, and ultimately make the school proud. Now, let me ask you, if you want to show that you're going to be a contributor in the future, that you're going to make a difference, what do you got to do? In the question window, please. What does this slide that you're looking at imply to you? Anybody have an idea? If you want to show that you will be a contributor in the future and make a difference, what do you need to do? No ideas? Dedication, okay, volunteering. Show past accomplishment. Exactly, Sophie. Exactly. You have to show that you did it in the past. Show qualities and support them with experiences. Right. Okay, very good, very good. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if you want to show you're going to be a contributor in the future, show you've done it in the past. Reveal a habit of contribution through your essays, your resume, your activity descriptions, your interviews, and yes, of course, letters of recommendation. So have you contributed in the past? And that's one of the reasons that community service is important. Obviously, the essence of medicine, the heart of it, is serving others. But realize when you're looking at community service, and somebody said, tell them about your clinical volunteer experience. Exactly. But realize that, well, these are kind of classic and very worthy organizations, the ones on the screen. The definition of community can be really, really broad. It can be any group that you are part of and that you serve. And the key difference between being a nice person or being a member is that you actually assume responsibility for something in your community, be it a fundraising drive, a membership drive, event planning, whatever it is. You assume responsibility for your community. That's a differentiator, and that makes you a contributor, and it makes the experience, the involvement, the participation more valuable from an admissions perspective. Now, non-traditional applicants those of you who are working already, may have extensive work experience to draw on that you can use to show some of the qualities that the schools value and to show that you are a contributor. So were you, for example, an engineer or a computer programmer, then perhaps you are also a problem solver, and you can use those problem-solving skills and as a diagnostician and in creating treatment plans. Or maybe you're a teacher, and then your communication skills can be applied to educating patients. Or maybe you were a team lead or an engagement manager. Then you have leadership and teamwork and organizational skills. And some of you mentioned it earlier in the webinar. Realize that most medical schools have too many qualified applicants, and many of the people who are rejected maybe can do the work, might have 2 or 3 or 4 elements of the framework, but they have to show that they're going to be a contributor, because admissions is a 2-step process. The first step is evaluating and determining who is qualified. And when you have acceptance stats like these, you can be sure that many of the rejected are qualified. The second step is selecting and crafting a diverse class of committed, talented future physicians. And that injects a subjective element to the admissions process, but the implication is that they want someone who can do the work, share their values, know something about clinical medicine, and can contribute something distinctive to their class and community. And that distinction can come from past contributions, it can come from a distinctive perspective on life, it can come, that's where somebody mentioned holistic admissions. This is really where it comes in. The distinctive background. So it can be all kinds of different things, but it's the idea that you are going to add. All right, let's go to the last of the 5 elements. All right, you're going to stand out there, right? Reveal the personality traits that med schools value. What personality traits are medical schools looking for? In the question window, please. Leadership, humility, very good. Diversity, good. Resilience, compassion, good. Team player, good. Commitment, yes. Resilience, good. Empathy, excellent, very, very important. There's one that I'm kind of surprised nobody's mentioned. Oh, you know, somebody did. Megan mentioned it. Okay, compassion is what I was looking for. Yeah. Okay. Leadership, again, you've hit on determined. That's also important. My list would include compassion, humility, attention to detail, professionalism, teamwork, communication skills, both the ability to speak clearly and to listen well. All parts of your application, the primary, the secondary, the interviews, and any casual interactions that you have with the staff or students at any medical school should convey these qualities. Now, these traits should come through in the stories you tell in your personal statement, in your most meaningful experiences, in the activity descriptions, the secondaries, the interview, both traditional and MMI. As I mentioned earlier, and as some of you mentioned also in response to my last question, leadership is highly valued, but teamwork is gaining and become really the flip side of the golden leadership coin. Can you do both? Do you have the judgment and humility to lead when appropriate and to be a team member and perhaps take a back seat when appropriate? Compassion and caring are absolutely required. Humility doesn't mean that you demean yourself, but it is definitely the opposite of arrogance and absolutely, again, required for effective teamwork. Attention to detail is reflected in the care you take on your essays and applications. And I interviewed a couple of years ago Jennifer Welch, the Assistant Dean of Admissions at SUNY Upstate, and she absolutely railed against the typos and lack of punctuation that her staff sometimes sees on their very simple secondary application. Okay, so apparently they don't ask for an essay. They're one of the schools that asks for a form and a check. I mean, if you can't get that right, it's really not reflecting very well on you. You aren't submitting, when you submit your application, you're not on Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, or Snapchat. You're applying to a professional school. Show you are a professional. And speaking of social media, clean it up. There was a Kaplan survey a couple of years ago that 29% of medical school admission staff did check applicants' social media accounts, and a majority of those who did found something that negatively affected an applicant's admissions chances. So again, this is a professional school you're applying to. Your application and even your social media should reflect the fact that you're going to be a professional, or at least anything that's public. Okay, so again, in terms of revealing the personality traits, selecting the examples in your essays and interview responses, choose those examples, experience, and anecdotes that answer the question and reveal the traits, most of which are also reflected in med school values in one way or another. So you're kind of doing double duty here. And don't make the reader think too hard. As Sydney Foote articulately laid out in her Nail Your Medical School interview webinar, explicitly weave into your anecdotes the traits you want the schools to recognize. Don't rely on them to figure it out or to come to the conclusion you want them to reach. Tell them. Now, one more way to show professionalism, commitment, discipline, and organization is very simply apply early and respond to all secondaries quickly. Almost every medical school admissions person I have spoken with says apply early. I add apply early without compromising the quality of your application, but that's my rule. I even call it Linda's rule. Ryan Gray on a podcast once said that medical school admissions is like musical chairs, and the longer the music plays, the longer the application cycle goes, the fewer chairs are available, either for interviews or for admissions. With secondaries, our recommendation is to return them ideally within 2 weeks of receipt. And I would even suggest before you start getting secondaries that you use the time between the submission of your primary and the arrival of secondaries to pre-write the most common essay questions and to do research so that you know why you want to attend the specific schools you are applying to. And Brianna, can I ask you to post the URL of the page where we have a collection of secondary essays and tips, maybe the download that we have for that, okay? Brianna will put that in the chat window in a second. But it would be, even if the secondaries change, you probably will be able to adapt some to new questions, either for the school you intended or for another school. And for all those that do not change, you'll be that much ahead of the game. Now, let's go back to your goal of submitting an application. Show that you belong in medical school. And we're going to have our little contest now. Okay, so your fingers should be posed over the keyboard. The first 3 people to answer the next question get a copy of the definitive guide to pre-medical post-baccalaureate programs. And the question is, what is the first thing that will make medical schools want to accept you? First part of my framework. Okay, grades and MCAT score, academic. Okay, so Nilu, you got it. Deb H, you got it. And Sai, you got it. Let me just write this down real fast. Deb. Okay. Brianna, can you jot down those names? Congratulations. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on. You're welcome. Okay, congratulations. All right, so let's go through the rest of them. The first one, again, is the academic track record showing you can do the work. Number 2, have the clinical experience and direction within medicine, that realistic perspective that we talked about. Number 3, show that you share the school's values and its mission. 4, demonstrate you'll be able to contribute distinctively. And 5, reveal value traits, compassion, leadership, teamwork, etc., empathy. And these were the steps I was recommending to Joe when I spoke to him. Joe had a lot to do, and he wasn't necessarily thrilled with all the advice, but he was pretty much a good sport about it. Last, a bonus piece of advice to keep in mind. The admissions committee readers, whether they're medical students, professors, or professional staff, are sharp, intelligent professionals. Don't try to craft, fake, or fool. What you want to do is submit an application that presents you at your best and is an authentic reflection of your achievements and dreams, keeping in mind the 5 elements of a successful medical school application. Now, I mentioned Joe at the beginning and really throughout the webinar. As I said, he wasn't thrilled with all the steps he needed to take, but he was appreciative of my candid suggestions and recognized the value in my guidance. I've spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of medical school applicants like Joe and like you, striving to get into medical school and stressed at the work involved and the possibility that they may not make the cut. We here at Accepted know how difficult and stressful this process can be, and we're here to help you. Your goal is to apply confidently and successfully to the best programs for you. To do so, you need the know-how supplied by experts, applying general information to you as an individual, to your specific situation, and that implies individual consulting. Given the complexity of the application process and the stakes, you need a guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. When you engage Accepted, you can access professional expert advice, experience, and objectivity. You can save time. You can apply with confidence. And most of our clients apply successfully. We have the admissions experts, the guides, who can mentor you through the process so that you achieve your goal of applying confidently and successfully. Former admissions directors, staff members, post-bac program directors who have been on the other side of valuing applicants and who can be your guide to the application process. So here's what I'd like to suggest you do after the webinar. Visit www.accepted.com/primary. That's the page you're looking at. Choose a service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need to apply the high-level advice I've given here to you, to your specific situation, and go from confusion to clarity and from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may ask, isn't Accepted expensive? Well, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious, even though it can be significantly higher. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with Accepted. The cost of reapplication, well, if the cost of secondaries varies, and some of you may be eligible for the fee assistance program, but if you're paying full price, you're probably paying $125 to $150 per school that you apply to. And if you apply to 20, well, you can do the math. Okay, that's $2,500 to $3,000. Just in application fees. There's also travel fees if you're invited to interview, and if you need to retake the MCAT, there's MCAT prep fees and the MCAT fee. You also would have additional year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO. And there's even the potential that you could have gotten into a better program with greater lifetime opportunities and earnings. Now, you're at a crossroads now. You can take the do-it-yourself approach, or you can invest in your professional future. Every year we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected that they would work with us a second time around. They would have been better off working with us initially, and so would you. And of course, if you're a reapplicant, and I noticed almost a third of the audience is a reapplicant today, we'd be more than happy to help you this time around and hopefully, change the outcome. But enough from me. What do Accepted's clients say? I've been loving my help so far. My consultant, Dr. Herman Gordon, has been very helpful and knowledgeable. Or on the right, I want to share my exciting news. I will be attending the University of Washington School of Medicine. I received an email from the Dean of Admissions saying that I am awarded a hefty scholarship. I'm feeling very blessed and excited right now. I want to thank you, Alicia, for your support throughout the application. Your patience and editing knowledge allowed me to express my passion for medicine. Well, here you have another one. I'm so excited and relieved to be accepted to a California school. I really appreciate all of Cheryl's help and input on my application. I felt much more confident in my personal statement after working with her. And the last one, hello, Sydney. Wow, I'm so impressed. You are a genius. I can't believe how well you managed to cut my essay in half without compromising my tone or eliminating the stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you. There are 17 more hours left till the application is due, and I am not stressed at all because I know I have you by my side. So again, we'd love to help you as we help these clients, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw, and hundreds, if not thousands of others over the last 20 years. So once again, on the screen is what I recommend. And I also mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that for webinar registrants, we have a special gift, $250 off any primary application package purchased by February 13th. We know that starting early is one way to finish early, apply early, and apply with a quality application. We're putting our money where our mouth is. Use coupon code MEDSAVE250 before February 13th and save $250 on, this is, by the way, our most popular flat rate med application service. Now for your questions, and you had some really, really good ones, so I'm going to go back to that. Okay. Deb asked, we have to send a resume with med school applications or enter our experiences. You use the activity descriptions for your experiences. Okay, we have other, you can also add questions now. Okay, so feel free. Okay, so another question, what about if you feel you need a post-bac but can't afford it? You have several options. There are some, like I know San Francisco State has a post-bac program because the former director is on staff with us, and that would probably be fairly inexpensive. You can also take some of the classes at state schools, which again are less expensive than four-year universities or private post-bac programs. Basically do an informal post-bac. You can try taking some classes through community college, some of the very basic sciences, though most schools would prefer that you take it at a four-year school. Those would be the best things I can suggest. I think some post-bac programs, UCLA, for example, has one that's specifically aimed at people who are underrepresented minority or financially challenged, and you might try some of those, see what kind of scholarships are available. Again, I think the public universities, I think Georgetown also has a program like that. UCLA does. So there are some opportunities in terms of post-bac programs for people who can't pay for the private post-bac programs. What is considered an average GPA MCAT? I keep hearing 3.8. Is that really accurate? So from Tara, and 3.8, 3.0, is that really accurate? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what the 3.0 is. 3.8 is average at some programs. Other programs, it's more like 3.6, 3.5, and now I'm talking about allopathic medical schools. For DO schools, it's a little bit below that, maybe 3.2, 3.3. MCAT, again, the average MCAT score in the United States for students accepted to allopathic school is around 509, 510. DO schools, I think it's lower. I can't remember the exact number, but it is definitely lower. We do have on the site in Embryonic, and I ask you to again post the med selectivity index, which allows you to see the average MCAT and MCAT scores for most programs in the United States. Medical school admissions requirements, which is developed by AAMC, has much more data, but you do have to subscribe for it. You have to pay for that. It's like $30, and you really get a lot of very, very valuable information. So if you can afford it, I would certainly consider it excellent investment in applying to medical school. Did I answer your question, Tara? It was a long-winded answer. I'm not even sure. Okay. All right, so you clarified 3.8, 3. All right, you got the answer. Okay, let's see what else we have here. If we register for this package, how long is the service valid for? You can request a refund for up to 1 year of unused time. If you want to extend it into a second application cycle, you would almost for sure need to pay an additional fee, but it would depend on how much work had been done. If you purchase it now, you can definitely use it for this upcoming application cycle, and I think it would be a great way for you to save $250 and at least start talking to your consultant. Are you still studying for your MCAT? Yeah. And when do you think you're going to take it? Yes, you can definitely sign up for it now and then work with your consultant after you take it. That would work fine. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Do you have any suggestions for reapplicants when it comes to writing another personal statement? I think our next webinar, certainly the next one I'm giving, is actually on reapplying to medical school. So you probably will be hearing about that, unless, you know, as long as you're getting our emails. The main thing, the biggest thing I would say is don't submit the same personal statement. One thing medical schools are going to want to know about is whether you've grown, whether you developed since you last applied. So you're going to need to change the focus a little bit of your personal statement to talk about how you've grown and developed. Unless, and even then, you know you're applying to all different medical schools, and presumably you could use most of last year's essay, but you don't want to have the essay end a year ago, because that, again, it would be like, what are you doing this year? What progress have you made? How have you grown as a person? How have you developed as a future physician? So you're going to need to update it, even if you apply to all different medical schools. If you apply to the same medical schools and you submit the same application, you frankly will not be showing any commitment to the process, and it will be, I think, held against you. Okay, let's see what else we have. You are a great audience. Lots of good questions here. Sophie asks, if I do a grad program, would med schools focus on my grad GPA more than my undergrad GPA? That is a really good question. I think they would focus, if you do a post-bac program, that carries a lot of weight. Obviously, it depends what you do the grad program in. If it's related directly to medicine and has many of the science courses that medicine wants to see, or that you did poorly in as an undergrad and you do well, I'm sure that would be considered. But I've heard different things when it comes to how are grad GPAs considered if it's not a formal post-bac program. There are also special master's programs, which sometimes have linkages to medical schools, and that's actually discussed in the book, the Definitive Guide to Post-bac Programs. And so that might be something that you want to look into also. I'm a non-traditional applicant. How long is the gap in years between undergraduate graduation and time of entering med school? Is there a limit? I don't know of any formal limit. I know that we have occasionally worked with people in their early 40s. I think, and I know I interviewed an older applicant, an older medical school resident. She wasn't old in the conventional sense, but she was older in terms of the typical age of medical school residents. And I'm trying to remember her name. I'm blanking on it at the moment, but she was, gosh, I can't believe it. Oh, well, I can't remember it at the moment, but if you look at the podcast, I think the podcast is called From Grief to Giving. Okay, and so you can, if you go to accept.com/listen-med, I think you'll find it. Okay, and I see that Brianna has provided the med school selectivity index where you can easily compare average MCAT and GPAs, also acceptance rates. Okay. You're welcome. Does a hard major like biochem engineering have any advantage? If you did well in it. If you get, a nice high GPA and a relevant and difficult major, then yes, that definitely shows you can do the work. But again, what I've been hammering away at is that it's not just the MCAT and the GPA, though they're important too. It's everything that I discussed. Okay. What are different ways to show diversity that reflect unique and important assets? Good question. Are you a plant? Did I plant you? No, I didn't. I think you can show diversity in 3 ways, and I like to call them the 3 IDs. And maybe, Brianna, if you don't mind, can you also post the article we have on writing the diversity essay? The 3 IDs are identity, I dids, and ideas. Okay? Late 20s is not old. Deb, late 20s is not old. Again, getting back to diversity. The three IDs are identity, I-DIDs, which are your achievements, and ideas. So identity is what we kind of classically think of as diversity, right? One's gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, sometimes political affiliation, things, you think, I am a whatever. That's your identity, okay? But it can also be I did. Maybe you have some very unusual achievements. You don't have to have climbed Mount Everest or swam the English Channel, but you could do something. Um, maybe you led a group of teens on a backpacking expedition. Maybe you've done other things that are pretty impressive. Those would be your I dids or achievements, and they can also be a form of diversity. And the last one is ideas. Maybe you are the one who is a real bridge builder. When there's conflict on a team, you know how to diffuse the tension, you know how to find commonality, and you know how to move your team forward. Maybe you're the creative thinker who kind of comes up with these out-of-the-box ideas that at first blush everybody wants to reject, and then they start thinking about it and they say, that's a really good idea. So that's another way to show diversity in terms of your perspective and your approach to problems and life and people. Okay? But good question. Okay. Geo, thank you. I'm told I have a great story, but my challenge is putting my story on paper. How can the consultants help me? Well, we can talk to you about your story, help you develop a theme for your story, which is the main point, and help you structure it in terms of organizing your thoughts. You then write it on your own, and we can edit it and correct it for clarity, style, grammar, word usage, sentence structure, etc. Now, if you want that assistance for only the personal statement, then that you might be more interested in our initial essay package. If you want that kind of assistance for your personal statement, the most meaningful experiences, and your activity descriptions, where you don't need quite as much guidance on those, then again, the primary application package that I've been talking about really is going to work best for you. Did I answer your question? Okay, great. Let's see, we have some more excellent questions here. For 2021 application cycle, is it too early to sign up for the MED application mentioned? For the 2021 application cycle, I would you could sign up for this, but this is not really what you need. What you might need is one of our pre-med consulting packages, which include up to 15 consultations prior to starting this application package and does include it. So it's a multi-year application package, okay? Can you, Brianna, could I ask you to post a link to that too for Tara, and she can check it out. How many schools do I suggest applying to? You're very welcome. I typically recommend about 20. It would depend a little bit on where you're located, how many in-state schools you have, your budget, and that kind of thing. But the medical school, it's hard, and that's what I recommend. Okay, let's see. Did I get everybody's questions here? Any other questions? Up here's a good one. Nope, I answered this one already. Okay. All right. I think we're going to wrap up. So I want to thank you all. You've been a marvelous audience. I want to thank you for your time, your answers, your questions, and your participation. And of course, I wish you nothing but good luck with your application, whether you use accepted or you don't use accepted. I want to share a final story and thought. Now, Sally Hired, accepted to work with her. She is an Asian American applicant who had good stats and a strong but fairly typical profile. Diversity was not her long suit. Her consultant coached her through the process, including coaching her to overcome shyness in interviews. Here's what Sally wrote after her acceptance. I don't think I would be at the same place today without your help. So out of 20 secondaries, I received 18 interviews. I went to 11, accepted to 5, and waitlisted to 4. While obviously Sally's results were great and the most obvious benefit of working with Accepted, there was another one, less tangible, but no less important. Sally was more clear before she worked with Accepted consultant Sydney Foote. So imagine yourself going alone through the next year process. It's a long process. Or imagine yourself going through it with somebody who can answer your questions, gets to know you really well, and can help you tell your story. Remember, the framework that I've been talking about today has 5 parts. They're all necessary for a successful application. It's not 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 that will do. You need all 5. Sally had all 5. Our successful clients have the 5, and you can too. Get accepted.